bestiality almost. I mean, that's very disturbing to me. I don't know what anybody would find attractive about pretending to be an animal and being sexually attracted to other animals, but that's essentially what furry culture is. They dress as animals, they dress as like giant stuffed animals, and it's a type of kink and fetish that these people partake in. And there is a very large subculture of it, and I think it does go hand in hand with once you get into these seedier forums. My name is Jaimee Michell. I'm the founder of Gays Against Groomers. I'm also the president. And I founded Gays Against Groomers in June of 2022 to basically, it is completely comprised of people from inside the community. Gays, lesbians, bisexual people. We've even had trans members over the years. And we exist to fight back against the sexualization, indoctrination, and medicalisation of children under the guise of LGBTQ plus activism and advocacy and rights. I founded the organization because I felt like our voices were very needed to combat this harmful agenda that was targeting children and also hurting ourselves in the process. Every gay person I knew in my life was very much against it, but you know, the approved narrative of the community was that we were all on board with it. So I thought our voices could hold more weight than your average straight person who gets instantly shut down as a bigot, transphobe, homophobe, all the other labels, which isn't true, but they use that to silence them, and they wouldn't be able to do that as effectively and easily with us. So that's how Gays Against Groomers was born and continues today.
I presume that you're part of the so-called LGBT plus community.
I'm a lesbian. I don't really identify with that acronym at all. I prefer LGB personally. I have nothing against trans individuals. I'm friends with trans people. But the reality is that we don't have anything in common. I never have. And I don't really appreciate being force teamed. You know, there's such a wild variation between lesbians and gay men, you know, let alone gay people and trans people. So I don't consider myself part of the community, the ever-growing acronym, but I am a lesbian.
Let's talk about some of the radicalization that we've seen, particularly in the transgender movement in recent years. What is the biggest concern that you have when it comes to so-called transgender ideology?
I mean, my biggest concern is its effect on children. It is corrupting the minds of children, very impressionable children. I think it'd be one thing if it was like just a way of thinking, but it leads to irreversible harm, physical harm, mental, obviously. You know, it's one thing to say it's okay to not be comfortable in your body. Everybody goes through that, especially at puberty, but it's another to say that you were born in the wrong body, and therefore, in order to be your true self, you need these drugs and surgeries before a kid can even consent, you know, before their mind is developed. So that has always been the most alarming to me. It's shocking to me that anybody goes along with it. And yeah, I think we're starting to see the more long-term side effects of these drugs and the mental illness that is not treated like any other mental illness is treated, but rather affirmed, quote unquote. You know, we're seeing an explosive occurrence of violence from trans-identified individuals, often very young, and it's very concerning. You know, the per capita data there. Obviously, trans people aren't the only people who commit violence, acts of violence and mass shootings, but you know, when you look at the amount of trans individuals compared to how many shooters and how many violent acts are committed by trans people, it's quite alarming. And I think, you know, society must pause and ask deeper questions as to what's really going on here, and are we actually addressing these individuals and treating them in the proper way? Because, I mean, anybody can see that we are not.
When it comes to so-called transgender violence, obviously there's been a lot of criticism that this even exists, you know, against people who say that transgenderism leads to violence, leads to these so-called, you know, these mass shootings and so on. Is there actually evidence to suggest that transgenderism can lead to killing, can lead to mass shooting and so on?
I mean, I think the evidence is there. I don't think, as I said, like, I don't think obviously, not only trans people commit violence, right? That's silly. Nobody is saying that, and I don't think anybody believes that. But I think the evidence is clear that this ideology, I think what the issue is a few things. First of all, there's underlying mental illness just to begin with. Like, it's not a hateful thing to say, it's just true that to be transgender, you have to have a mental illness. It's called gender dysphoria. I mean, nowadays it's kind of also just a fad, a social contagion. But if you really believe you're trans and to be diagnosed as such, you have to have gender dysphoria. That is a mental illness. Compound that with this propaganda from the mainstream media and online and in the classroom telling you that there's a genocide, a trans genocide being committed against you and your people, essentially, for just trying to live. That's a lie that they're being told. But I mean, if you're a mentally ill person and you believe you're told and you believe that people are out to kill you, to genocide you, I mean, I think it's fair to assume that some people would go to extremes to stop that from happening. And they sadly, because the people who oppose like what Gays Against Groomers is doing, the people who support gender affirming care for children and who support sexualizing children and indoctrinating them with LGBTQ plus propaganda, they can't tell the truth about that. Actually, it's just about protecting kids. They have to go to extremes and say they just hate all trans people and they want you dead, when that's never been true. From our end, and me personally, that's not true at all. We just want kids to be left alone. But these bad actors and institutions are saying that because people want to protect kids, they actually want you dead. That turns these mental ill people, that radicalizes them into taking action against that. And then the final piece, which I think is, the cross-sex hormones, synthetic cross-sex hormones being given to a mentally ill person who believes they're being genocided. This combination obviously it's a bomb just waiting to go off, and it has gone off time and time again recently, and more so as the days go by.
So we did see this shooter or this mass shooting in Nashville, Tennessee, which was committed by a transgender individual who also wrote some messages that seem to be linked with far left ideology. So perhaps this is one instance of transgenderism leading to violence. Can you tell us about some of these things? Can you unpack?
Definitely. As a lesbian, JD Vance likes to refer to gay people like me as normal gays. We look like your everyday person walking down the street. I don't think you'd necessarily be able to tell that normal gays are gay just by looking at them or speaking to them. So we don't really, I don't know much about furry culture, I'm going to be honest, but I know, because I'm in this line of work and advocacy, the dangers of what goes on with these dark, online rooted fetishes, really, that dabble into bestiality almost. I mean, that's very disturbing to me. I don't know what anybody would find attractive about pretending to be an animal and being sexually attracted to other animals, but that's essentially what furry culture is. They dress as animals, they dress as like giant stuffed animals, and it's a type of kink and fetish that these people partake in, and there is a very large subculture of it. And I think it does go hand in hand with, once you get into these seedier forums, that are filled really with queer and trans individuals, it leads them, like, it's almost like just a normal sex life isn't fulfilling enough anymore. Like, they have, as I stated earlier, it's very, you can't be transgender without having a mental illness. And so, if gender dysphoria, that mental illness is there, obviously, like, it's a hotbed for other issues to arise as well. It's not a healthy mind.
Do you think that the transgender culture or ideology or whatever, it's obviously a group of these individuals who are, a lot of them are online, talking to each other in these forums, talking about these things that, normal people don't understand. And in a way, that's their kind of superpower. That's their weapon. That's how they like it, I guess, because they have their own community with their own jargon and their own secrets. And, it's a kind of exclusionary language. Do you think that there are these kind of self-radicalized, in a way, isolated communities of people online who are talking to each other and kind of radicalizing each other, almost like a cult?
Definitely. I definitely think so. And I've seen, I'm not part of these groups, these secret private chats that exist on, apps like Discord, where I believe Tyler Robinson and his boyfriend were very active, or other platforms like that. But obviously they exist. These the social contagion of trans ideology and gender ideology spreads in the same manner. And it just, it leads from the path of gender ideology ends in nothing good ever. It starts off, people say, oh, it's all rainbows, the pride flag and the colors and the love, and love is love. And but it doesn't ever stop there. It always ends in much more harm to the mind, to the body. And yeah, I think that a lot of this radicalization is self-imposed. They egg each other on. It's like, another thing that's important to understand is that these people need validation, and they want to one up each other. We live in a time where likes, social media points and likes and followers is a currency, and people want more. It's a dopamine rush. It's a real problem, not just when it comes to gender stuff, but just youth in general. Even adults get completely sucked into it and get stuck online, doom scrolling and just having this other identity that doesn't match who they are maybe in real life, but then inevitably it will start to bleed together, I think.
So obviously the alternative point of view is that transgenderism is not a mental illness. It's just people expressing themselves, their so-called true selves. And transgender people, this is again, the argument goes, are like gay people in that they always have been transgender and they discover that, in their childhood or whatever. And that by attacking them or maybe you wouldn't be attacking them, but by describing them as being mentally ill, they see that as a kind of attack and an insult. How do you respond to this idea that transgenderism is just normal? We've seen it all throughout history. If you look at cultures, you can look at all these things in the past. And what you're saying is so-called transphobia.
Yeah, I don't think that that's really fair. It's not a mean thing to say. Like I said, it sounds hateful, but it really isn't. I mean, the DSM-5 had gender dysphoria in the book and studied by doctors, created by doctors for a very long time. And, I think it recently was removed due to social pressure and yelling about transphobia. But if you go to a doctor, the way to even begin to get hormones, cross-sex hormones or puberty blockers, or be approved for a surgery, and pretty much every, like 99.9% of the time, you have to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria. I agree. Like I'm very well aware that trans identified people have existed for millennia, in many different cultures as well, obviously. But that doesn't mean that, there's not something wrong with your brain. I don't think it's a mean thing to say. Like I personally, mental health issues affect millions and millions, billions of people around the world. And I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of, really. I think that the stigma around it has been, just mental illness in general, has been receding over, recent times. And I think it should continue to. But no, I don't think it's a hateful thing to say whatsoever. I think we have to be honest about the situation, especially, a lot of people just like to cover it up with the language of like yell that you're being transphobic to shut you up. But then we continue to get these issues, more and more shooters and violence is being committed by people who identify as trans. And so it's not, it's not right. These people, I truly believe they do need serious help. Like they should get the help that actually eliminates the distress. It's not nice to live that way, and it's certainly not kind to the victims of these violent shootings and murders, and their families, to ignore the problem. I mean, we're all adults here. We need to have just fair and honest conversations about it to get to the root of the problem.
What about these people again who said that this is just a natural form for them? Like they don't feel that they're mentally ill in any way. They just want to live their true selves. This is how they feel that they really are. Would you accept those people as legitimately a man or a woman or whatever that they claim that they are?
As far as kids go, no. No, I don't. I think that but adults are free to do whatever they want. I think that trans people exist. I mean, I'm friends with some of them. I think it's a real thing. I don't think it's that the issue doesn't exist. I think that is a type of individual, albeit very rare, but they do exist, obviously. But if you're talking about young people, children, they're putting 9-year-olds on puberty blockers. There's no way that they can actually know that they're trans. They don't, and furthermore, and even more importantly, they're unable to make such a life altering decision that will affect them for the rest of their lives, such as getting on medications and drugs that are otherwise given to pedophiles and sex offenders to chemically castrate them, which is what is happening.
So let's talk a bit about the children and how they're being impacted by this. We've seen a huge increase in the number of kids in America, and I think in Britain as well, who claim that they are part of this LGBT community in recent years. I think it was some surveys have suggested as much as 1 in 5 young people claim that they're LGBTQ plus, blah, blah, blah. What's going on there? Why are so many young people today identifying as part of that community?
I think it's a few things. First of all, I think that that's completely unnatural. I mean, I think that's clear evidence that there is a social contagion aspect to it, that there is a fad aspect to it. And actually, those numbers are finally turning around for the first time. I saw a poll that came out. I cannot remember off the top of my head where it's from, but it's showing for the first time in like 15 years, fewer young people are identifying as trans. If this were like people say, and society, more trans people are coming out, or gay people are coming out, honestly, because society has become more accepting, I don't think that this trend would show a reversal now. I think that back when I was growing up, and I think through all of human history, kids have gone through phases. When I was growing up, it happened to be like the emo phase and the goth phase. But now you have this transgender phase. Only this time, when kids finally snap out of it, they're left with missing body parts and sterilized, unable to have children, and have lifelong health problems. So it's very dangerous. And it's alarming, but I am glad, and I think it's due to the hard work of organizations like Gays Against Groomers and our allies and parents and just concerned moral people all over the world saying, hold on, this is not right to push on children. I think I just saw an article today that said like 1 out of every 3 or 4 kids shows on Netflix and movies include some kind of LGBTQ plus character or theme. When going back to when I was growing up, once again, my generation was never influenced or had this kind of propaganda or media pushed on us, and we all figured out who we were just fine, naturally and in a healthy way, I'd say, for the most part. It's sad, and I don't think that it's right for anybody to influence a child or a young person about anything. It's especially, it'd be one thing if it was harmless, right? Or it comes from a more harmless place, but it comes from these industries. I mean, you look at the trans medical field right now, and it's booming. I mean, it's becoming like a multi-billion-dollar a year industry. So obviously, you have to look at why this is being pushed, and I think it does go back to money, and that's very evil. It's one thing to try and hurt anybody, an innocent person, but to do so to children and to use them for profit and to hurt them for profit is, I think, probably one of the more evil things that can ever happen on Earth, really.
So I was watching an interview recently between Piers Morgan and Tucker Carlson, and they were talking about this issue as to why so many young people are identifying as gay and so on. And Piers' argument was, well, the reason that so many young people today say they're trans or gay or whatever is because it's suddenly acceptable within society to say that. And these people would have always identified in this way if it was just society being open and inclusive and stuff. So in the 1950s, you would have seen the same number of gay children and trans children. It's just that back then there was a lot of stigma and taboos around this stuff. Do you agree with Piers that actually this is all about inclusivity and that's why so many people today are identifying as trans and other things?
I think that that would be totally fair to assume and to conclude if it wasn't for, first of all, like I just mentioned, that new study showing that it's actually declining. I mean, while the media is still rising, that include the children's media is still rising, the drag queen story hours are still happening, albeit here there are more laws being enacted against it to try and stop it, but nothing has really changed in terms of acceptance, and yet the numbers are starting to go down. I think I think that goes to show that no, that's probably not true, and maybe it would be if there wasn't also the like mass amounts of outside influence and pressure being pushed on these kids and shown to them to identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community.
So obviously your group is called Gays Against Groomers. Can you talk a bit about the grooming that's going on and what's the motivation behind the grooming of the children? Do you think that there's something like malicious going on here? Maybe even, I don't know, a sexual thing? What's going on with the grooming? What is the grooming and why do you think it's happening?
Definitely. Well, I am asked this question a lot, and I believe it's a few different things. I think first and foremost, as I just touched on, was money. It's a massive industry to provide these transgender drugs and procedures. And the younger you get somebody on it, the longer they're going to be hooked up to it. People often, I don't think, understand or realize that being trans, it's not really a noun, it's a verb. Once you stop taking the drugs, you're no longer trans. Like, you're going to go back to your birth sex, even though, excuse me, you're always your birth sex, right? But like looking like your birth sex, without drugs and without surgeries, trans doesn't exist, right? Like, you're not trans. So I think obviously money is there, probably the biggest motivator. I also think another one is normalizing pedophilia. If you look back at like the history of queer theory, all of the original proponents of this queer theory, were pedophile apologists or pedophiles themselves. I think that pushing children, these pornographic books in schools that are labeled as LGBTQ, so like people let it slide. They feature very inappropriate and heavily sexualized material that is not appropriate for any child, or to be in any school library. And then there's the drag queens for kids, where the shows where they're basically like children are handing these drag queens, these half naked gyrating, very scantily clad performers. They're handing them dollar bills in their G-strings and stuff. It's like, what's going on here? So I think, and furthermore, sorry, the last point regarding that, like, if a child can consent to doing something as extreme as permanently altering their body, taking chemical castration drugs and cutting their healthy breasts off, what can't a child consent to? I think the line from A to B there is a very short and direct one you can draw. So I always find that I believe that those are the two biggest motivators.
Now, I know you mentioned earlier that obviously your major focus is on the children and on preventing them from having these surgeries and testosterone and whatever. But what about the adults? Now, someone like Matt Walsh would argue that transgenderism or transgender surgeries shouldn't be allowed because it's against the Hippocratic Oath. We don't allow people to go and chop their arms off if they want to because they say they have some fetish for it or do self-harm in other ways. So why should we allow adults who, as you say, are mentally ill to chop their breasts off or, have surgery, like removing their penis or whatever it is that they want to do? Why should adults even be allowed to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the difference is they have free will. I think that the line should probably be that taxpayers should have no responsibility to pay for any of the surgeries. But, you know, obviously plastic surgery exists, and I'm not saying they're the same, but like that there are other surgeries that are elective that lead to great harm and disfigurement many times. But adults can are have free will and are consenting and know the risks for the most part. I would argue that an 18-year-old does. If it were up to me, I'd say 25 because that's when the prefrontal cortex is fully developed. But you can go and fight and die for your country at 18. So then those are just kind of the rules. Like you're an adult then. I think personally that's too young. That isn't the organization's stance. But yeah, I think it just comes down to as long as an adult isn't hurting somebody else, I don't agree with having control over other people like that. But it's just when it's a child, they literally it's impossible for a child to consent. So I think that's the main reason that this issue has become so highly just so massively pervasive in our society and has inflamed this massive culture war and discussion and action to stop it because they're just children. They're the most innocent among us, and they're very innocent for a very short time. And to anybody who would try and rob them of a moment of that, it should not be allowed in a civil society.
Now, you talk about some of these books in schools that are showing very explicit pornographic content to children that are framed as kind of LGBT books. Now, I know that if you go into a bookstore in America, you'll get a banned book section, which will have some
Yeah.
of these like gay trans books, and they call you like a book burner. They would
Yeah,
say that you're like a Nazi kind of censorship person who's trying to shut down, gay voices. How do you respond to that? That you're the person trying to ban books?
I mean, I think that porn for kids should be banned, and if you don't think that it should be, then I am very suspicious of you, and I think that authorities should probably sweep your hard drives because I think they might find something that you wouldn't be too pleased with the public knowing about. It's just insane to me. It's such a reach. It's not book banning to keep sexual content and materials away from children. Yeah, I 100% do not buy into that at all, and I think it's another tactic that they use to shut down the conversation and to allow these books to go into the hands of children. Like, how dare you be a book burning Nazi when you just want kids to not read porn? How dare you? It's the same how they call Gays Against Groomers an anti-trans far right organization, despite us having trans members and being nonpartisan. It's just a way to shut it down and to allow this agenda to continue through unabated.
You also talked about the representation of gay and trans people in media for children. That's massively increasing and so on. Can you give us an idea of what children are up against today in schools when it comes to the kind of cultural things that they're seeing, the TV shows, the books, the whatever? Is there a lot of so-called gay and trans ideology being pushed on kids today?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many examples, particularly on Netflix. They are like the worst offenders of this, but Disney, Blue's Clues, all the new remakes of the classic Disney movies, they have to slide in a trans character. I shouldn't say all Disney movies, but very often you will find these new kids movies have a gay character or a trans character. Or there was even one, I forget the name of the show, but one of the characters was a young girl who identified as trans who was shopping for like binders and stuff. And it's like, why are you putting this idea in these children's heads? Like, they're not getting these thoughts on their own. It's one thing to let them figure out who they are on their own. And obviously, like, there will be gay and trans people. If you do that, like, that's how it's always been. But to plant an idea in their head is very nefarious, especially when it leads to permanent medicalization. It's just like I said, I think there are some people who take it way too far. Like, if there's like a lesbian couple in a movie that is kid friendly, I don't think that's bad, because there are families with two moms and there are families with two dads, and like I think that it's fine to show a child that the world around them, right? But it's one thing to put the idea in their head that, oh, this girl likes skateboarding. I like skateboarding, but she thinks she's a boy. Am I a boy? You know, it's like that's not true. One of the things that bothers me so much, probably the most about the gender ideology push on children, is that it's erasing tomboys and feminine boys. I've been a tomboy my whole life. You know, it's totally fine for a girl to like skateboarding and getting her knees scraped up and playing in the mud instead of playing with Barbies and dresses and wearing dresses. You know, that's totally normal. That's called being a tomboy. And most, you know, or being a little boy and liking to play with Barbies instead of playing sports, that's okay. There is no wrong way to be a boy or a girl, and trans ideology teaches the exact opposite. And somehow it's called progressive. Mermaids in the UK, I'm not sure if you guys know this out there, but they literally, it was exposed, they have this scale that they had on a projector board, on the whiteboard, and the scale was G.I. Joe to Barbie. And it was like, and it was like G.I. Joe is the boy and Barbie is the girl. And if you like Barbie more than G.I. Joe, like if you're further on the scale towards Barbie, then you're actually a girl. And that's just so insane. And this is what they're teaching kids. Like that to me is a lot different than showing, you know, a same-sex couple. Because like that's real. And a lot of their friends probably will have same-sex couple parents. So.
Okay, Jaimee, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.